Reverse situation that the exception is becoming the norm and the norm is becoming the exception brings me to the last topic for you that you have suggested, which is this green mass. Are we losing it in a way with this reverse situation? What do you mean by this green mass?
So Green Mass is the title of my latest book project dedicated to the writings of St. Hildegard of Bingen. And the title itself is purposefully ambiguous in English, at least, because it can mean green mass as the green weight. The biomass of plants is often said to be the largest biomass on the planet. So it's simply the heaviness of this green matter. But it can also mean Mass as liturgical church service, which is a kind of spiritual event. And I think that giving the book this title, I'm faithful to the spirit of Hildegard herself, who is very skilled at reading the most spiritual connotations in the most physical and mundane of realities, and vice versa, bringing the spiritual things down to earth and finding certain mostly vegetal analogues to them. And so this latest book project actually emerged from an invitation by the Journal of Comparative and Continental Philosophy to write for a special issue on the soundproof room. The idea was to engage with an author without any specialized jargon, without any apparatus, critical apparatus of scholarly interpretations and history of interpretations, to simply engage with them in the singular kind of way with respect to our situation today, our shared situation today. And the author whom I chose was St. Hildegard of Bingen. And very quickly, the soundproof room has come to be a spacious soundproof house, and not even so soundproof, but it became a reverberation chamber or resonance chamber for contemporary and pre-modern concerns, for ecology and theology, for philosophy and mysticism, for plant and human wisdoms. And my engagement with Hildegard's writings was especially centered on her notion of Viriditas, which I translate as the green in green, literally, but figuratively it means the self-refreshing vegetal power of creation to recreate itself, to give itself a body every time, every spring, to remake the world. The interesting bit for me was that much of Hildegard's theological drama happened between these two poles of Viriditas on the one hand, the self-refreshing power of creation that no longer needs an external creator, on the one hand, that is Viriditas, and on the other hand, what she calls Ariditas, that is a certain dryness, desert heat that is allergic to life itself. And this is how, in a very non-moralistic way, she interprets sin and sinfulness as this arid reality of a desert rebelling against life itself. So in this drama, I recognized much of the standoff between Ariditas and Viriditas. I recognized the hidden roots of today's environmental ecological crisis that can be thought differently based on this alternative theological tradition that within Christianity presents us with a very heterodox, one would even say almost heretical version of what a theological religious tradition would be. The other reason why I was drawn to St. Hildegard was that I recognized that in her theological project, she accomplished what I have been trying to do in my philosophical project. That is, she went back to the canon, to Judeo-Christian tradition, and vegetalized parts of that canon, making analogies to key figures in the tradition, to the saints, to Mary and Jesus, and those analogies were always vegetal. So Mary became the greenest branch, and Jesus the most brilliant flower blossoming on the branch. and so on and so forth. And by vegetalizing these canonical figures, she imbued the tradition with a new life, a life precisely that is not the life of spirit somewhere over there, no longer in this world, but with the life that is of this world, and that allowed these traditional figures to mutate, to metamorphose, to grow, and even to decay, to blossom, something that is not allowed, is not permitted by the metaphysical norm or the metaphysical standard usually imposed on Judeo-Christian thought.
Hildegard von Bingen was many centuries ago. And how do you understand that today we are, or you are, or a few people are going toward the vegetal and trying to relate to the vegetal more in a way? How do you analyze or understand this reconnection?
I think that we have to recognize that the roots of the contemporary environmental crisis go back centuries, if not millennia. They go back to a kind of worldview that also spawned the actual practices that are prevalent today: economic, political practices, technological practices. And this worldview is what I term metaphysics. The key idea of metaphysics, whether in philosophy or in theology, is that the reality here below, the finite world that we live in, is infinitely less valuable than the true reality of ideas, of God, of substance, and so on, of all of these things that philosophers and theologians have invented and thought about for centuries, if not millennia. And so if we devalue this world here below in relation to these ideals that are not of this world, then in that case, the world that we live in can suffer any sort of violence, can suffer, we can abuse it in any way we want, and there are no moral or ethical or theological or philosophical repercussions to that, precisely because the valuation has been already predetermined, has been made, that there is no value in this reality that is passable, that is finite, and so on. And so I think that I'm turning to Saint Hildegard of Bingen precisely because she rebels against this metaphysical framing of this world. She sees an infinite theological value in the most simple things of the world, including in plants. In plants, she recognizes the spiritual realities, or at least the precursors of spiritual realities that would later be thought of as God and the Holy Spirit and the figure of Mary and Jesus. So in her thought, the valuation is completely different. Even though she comes from the same tradition, she undermines the basic pillars of this tradition from within, and therefore presents us with an alternative vision of how this world should be treated, or of how the state of our environment would have been if, for instance, the development of thinking flowed from Hildegard's thought and not, let's say, from St. Thomas Aquinas, right? So this is the reason why I think, despite the nearly 1,000 years that separates us from Hildegard, she remains crucial to understanding where we are today.
When we talk about vegetal plants, the first image that comes to our mind, and obviously the examples that are given by everybody are trees or countryside, but green countryside. Okay, it's this green thing, and it's flowers, and it's a vegetable we eat. But we know that there are vegetals and vegetation, maybe very small and very not big trees, obviously, in deserts and in harsh environment like Antarctica. We have even those small things. And also that there is an underwater rich vegetal environment. So what is your take on this? I think that when we talk about nature and plants and vegetables, we are leaving outside of a discussion half of it.
Yes, that is absolutely true that we are leaving lots of plants out of the discussion precisely because they are viewed as insignificant, as uninteresting, as too common. And one of the philosophers who tried to rescue these plants from oblivion, one of the rare philosophers who did this was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, precisely who in his botanical expeditions only was interested in the most common of plants, and who in his reveries said that he wished that he could write a book on every small leaf of blade of grass, on every small piece of moss that he encountered in the woods. So I think this we are definitely lacking this attention to the most presumably common and unnoteworthy that actually hides lots of sources for wonder precisely because it has been ignored and overlooked. And if we finally turn to these seemingly insignificant plants, we would be surprised with what we find there. But then also I would want to add that when I talk about plants and vegetality, I do not mean only the members of the kingdom Plantae, what in biology is known as the kingdom Plantae. I consider vegetality to be this transversal tendency of existence that we humans also harbor in ourselves, insofar as we are the carriers of what Aristotle called the vegetative soul, for instance. And so, to my mind, we have to turn not only to the least significant of plants outside of ourselves, but also into ourselves, into our own thinking, our own psyche, and our own physiology, in order to rediscover the vestiges of vegetal existence that have been repressed and suppressed precisely by this metaphysical tradition that wanted to maintain the identity of the human as the highest living being at the pinnacle of existence. Without considering, obviously, the animality of human beings, but not to say anything of the vegetality of the human. And so much of my work is geared toward the unrepression of these vegetal vestiges in our bodies and minds.